Hello everyone, this is John from RPGs and More, and in today's episode, I'd like to talk to you about OD&D. Specifically, the real, my printout of the OD&D rules, 1974 original Dungeons and Dragons. Now these are prints that this is a printed version of all 7 of the original notebooks, or small little booklets that were available back in 1974-75 era. And I got these on DriveThruRPG. There's no affiliation here. I'm just telling you where they're available. And I printed them out on regular sized paper as opposed to the pamphlet or the digest size that they come in. Now I did this for several reasons. The first one being I kind of like the larger size because it's easier to read. It's automatically enlarging it, which is great for someone like me whose eyesight is not the best, shall we say. These glasses are not for show. And therefore, anytime I get something that's digest-sized recently, except for the Tiny Dungeon stuff, which is already large-size font anyway, I have just started printing it out on standard-size paper because it automatically enlarges it and makes it easier to read. Now, the other reason why I did this is because while I have the reprints that Wizards of the Coast did of this box set so long ago, and they're nice, and I like those reprints, and they're not too difficult to read, but it's kind of a collector's item, even though it's all beat to heck at this point, and it's been, from several moves and me opening it up and reading the booklets a couple of times and things like that. So it's not really good for reference material, for, reading, say, on the bus. But this, because I printed it myself and I bound it myself because I'm a nerd like that, I can take these things, I can read them on the bus, I can mark up the pages, I can do whatever I want, write in my own house rules on the margins, all that fun stuff, because it's my book and it's just, that's all it is. And they're all watermarked with my name on the pages, so no one cannot say that I am doing a bad thing and printing things out that I shouldn't be printing out, because it's all legal. Ha! Not to mention, it was a lot cheaper to do it this way than to even attempt to find these things on eBay. Oh my gosh. I looked at the prices for this stuff on eBay. Even like the reprints on eBay are going for insane amounts of money. Basically, printing this paid for the binding machine that I used to bind it, just in expense of not having to get something just to read. So think about that when you're considering whether or not to do something. You can also buy these PDFs and print them out, and you don't have to spiral bind them like I did. You can just put them in a binder and 3-hole punch them, and you're good to go. Not a big deal. You can 3-hole punch them and then get those folders that have the tabs in them, and then have one folder for each of these 7 booklets, and that would easily fit, especially if you were printing, both sides on the paper. Not a problem. So that's another way you can do it. Now, why would you do this? So let's kind of go back to, it's expensive to get these things. So okay, great, and easier to read. But why would we go back to OD&D? Now, there's 2 reasons for that. Probably more of the reasons, but we'll start with 2. First, it's fun. It is fun to read where the game came from. I'm no gaming historian. There are people that dedicate a larger portion of their lives than I can fathom to reading and understanding the history of RPGs, especially of Dungeons and Dragons, and where the game came from and who was involved, and most of these people are still with us, and we can go and talk to them, and we can ask questions and things like that. That's great. And that is, if that's your jam, go for it, do it. I enjoy doing it when I get the opportunity, which is not too often, but I do enjoy those kinds of like, hey, I like that I can go and ask a question of someone, and it's cool. But it's fun to read the original books, not because they're easy to play, but they're not that hard. But they references to High Gygaxian. Slightly overblown, but not really. It can be difficult to parse out what everything means, and that's one of the reasons why we have so many retro clones like Osric and Iron Falcon out there in order to try to help these things make more sense. Swords and Wizardry as well is another retro clone, although that one's a bit less of a rejigging of the rules to make them more understandable, and then as opposed to rejigging the rules to make them more playable and kind of really changing things up, which is great. It's one of the reasons why I like Swords and Wizardry, but we're not talking about Swords and Wizardry here. We're talking about the originals. So yes, it's fun. It's fun to read the original version. It's fun to learn about it and try to understand where the game came from in relation to where it is now. What was the original intent? When you go back to this version of the rules, for example, I went in and I started reading the section on the different races that you could play. Elves, dwarves, and halflings are the three big ones you can pick from. One of the things that I discovered is that in the first rendition of all of this, something that I thought was always present wasn't. And that was the minimum scores needed to play various races. Like you could not have an elf with a charisma less than X, that sort of thing. Now, I started with second edition, or I think it's now referred to 2.5 because it was the second edition, but the black cover of the books. That's where I started. And in those books, there was minimums for everything and maximums. You could not have a dwarf with a charisma of 18. Like, that just didn't happen. And so to me, I kind of thought that those things were always baked in, and I was sitting here saying, well, I don't like that kind of thing. I mean, why would we do that nowadays? Because we really, we're in a more enlightened society than we were back then. I'm not actually convinced of that. But I kind of thought it was always in there. However, it wasn't. Because in the first book, Men and Magic, there are no restrictions as to the ability scores for elves, halflings, or dwarves. What there are restrictions of how high they can get in level in their various classes. Those are restricted, not what their ability scores are, not what they are capable of. They also don't get any bonuses either. So those of you saying, well, I don't like the fact that, dwarves get these a bonus to Constitution because that, pigeonholes them and all these other things. Well, then go back to OD&D because that stuff wasn't there, not at the beginning. And I dig it because it allows there to be no assumptions. And then we can start creating our own world. So you want to have that charismatic dwarf that's just like the charming Blaive that everyone loves hanging out with. I mean, you don't have a negative modifier to anything to contend with. You don't have a positive modifier to anything to contend with. You just roll your dice and assign your ability scores. Bravo, we're done. So that was one thing, and I just stumbled upon that. I wasn't even intending to find it, and I saw that. I said, "Oh my gosh, that's interesting." It doesn't change how I play the game. It doesn't change my world view of anything because I'm a person who's quite capable of doing that on my own. Thank you very much. But what it does do is it changes my perspective on where the game came from. And it allows me to put some of the changes that we see and some of the ones that we like and the ones we don't like into greater context. And that's part of the fun. It's the discovery and then the understanding. That's part of the fun. So that's one reason why you might want to read these. Another one is, it really is a complete game. It's sometimes a bit confusing to understand, but if you really want to play old school revival, old school Renaissance, and you want to play old school style, all you have to do is go on to drivethrurpg.com and download these PDFs and play true old school. You can even get just the first three, Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and then Wilderness and Dungeon Encounters, I think it's called, or Underground Adventure or Exploration. Anyway, just the first three booklets. And that's, you're done. That's the funny thing is, we don't need all of these retro clones in order to play the original game. For a long time we did. For a long time you could not go back and play OD&D unless you owned the books, could find them on eBay, pirated them, which I never recommend because piracy is not good, or you're one of those people who got involved in the very beginning of OSRIC or Basic Fantasy, although Basic Fantasy is I think it's BX, not OD&D. So Basic Fantasy is a slightly different kettle of fish, but they're within the same pond. Different fish, same pond. But you couldn't get them. So you couldn't really delve into it. And that's one of the reasons why OSRIC came into being, is to try to bring some of these like OD&D and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition stuff back into people's hands in a more modern format so that people could actually use it. But because these PDFs are now out there legally to just buy and download, it's kind of funny because now we don't really need a lot of it. We can actually go back and play the original game as it was originally written by the original authors and do so without breaking the bank. In fact, in a lot of cases, buying these original notebooks and then adding your own house rules to it, excuse me, is substantially cheaper than going and, say, buying Dungeon Crawl Classics. That's not a knock on Dungeon Crawl Classics, because if you like it and that's your jam, then go for it, because I think that game's hilarious. I love it. But it's not always my jam. I enjoy it as an aesthetic. I enjoy it as a concept, but I've not always enjoyed playing it. Different topic, different time. Anyway, so that's kind of another reason to look at this, is because if your desire is to really play the old school way, then there it is. It's right there. It's within our hands reach, and it's not hard to get your hands on. You can buy these for, I think it might cost you $30 to $40 total for all of these PDFs. I don't quote me on that one. I think it might be cheaper than that. And then whatever it costs you to print them out on your printer at home, or don't, and just use your PDF reader, and you're gaming for a lifetime if you want to. So, and you're enjoying all the original art. I mean, come on, that's fun. So anyway, I just thought this was really neat. I thought I'd share it for a little bit and let you know that this is an option out there. If you're one of those people like me that enjoys this sort of thing, you want to see, hey, what monsters were in the original releases and what were they like? You can just grab that monsters section and go ahead and give it a read. And you can do that and then say, okay, that was fun. Put it back on the shelf. Go back to whatever version of the game you prefer, but you've got that reference material. So even if you don't want to run a game in it, which you don't have to, it still can be fun to read and reference to kind of understand this is where it all came from. And I enjoy it, and I'm enjoying my read-through of these books. I'm enjoying seeing the original Greyhawk, the original Blackmoor. What was considered important to include? What wasn't? The old, I think it was like the old Temple of the Demon Frog or the Temple of the Frog, whatever. And kind of reading what an original module in Dungeon looked like, and what was important to them at that time. And that's all here. It's all at our fingertips. Now, I am going to talk about some other retro clones in the future that I do quite enjoy. One of them is going to be Iron Falcon. I'm going to talk about that in a future video. Iron Falcon's pretty cool, and I have lots of good things to say about it. But for right now, I just wanted to say that that OD&D is still a thing. It's still out there. It's easy to get your hands on, and I do recommend it. And that's really about it. I think that there's a lot of good to be had here. There's a lot of recognizing the weirdness where it all came from too, which is fine, and the high Gygaxian if you enjoy that sort of thing. Although I don't think it's as prevalent in these booklets as it was, say, in first edition AD&D. Give it a shot. Give it a read. Laugh at it. Laugh with it. Laugh at me. It's all good, man. Lady. Whoever. Enjoy yourselves. It's a beautiful day. Have fun. Thank you for listening to my ramble, and peace be with you. Bye-bye.